humor is now the news. When I turn on the news now, and this is not a joke, I know this is going to sound like, funny exaggeration or something like that. When I turn on the news, it's for a laugh, and I'm not joking. And it's every night. It's not, it's not because there's something special on. When I watch the news, I'm laughing almost every time. Now, I get a different laugh depending on which network I'm watching, right? So sometimes the laugh is just the way they say it. Sometimes it's the situation. Sometimes it's some famous person who's lying so poorly that it's just hilarious. But this all gets me to, I had watched, myself on Fox, because as most of you know, I appeared on Tucker Carlson's show last night. So I had the network on, and I'd sort of seen their lineup. And so it was time to sample CNN. And I flipped over to CNN, and oh my God, it was comedy gold. If you have not watched CNN last night, make sure you turn it on while this Don Jr. story is still alive. I have dubbed this whole controversy NothingGate because there's nothing there, but they're pretty sure it's terrible, whatever that nothing is. And the question I ask myself is, if you're on the anti-Trump side and you're looking at the Don Jr. talking to this lawyer who may or may not have had some, Russian government contact or whatever, and I say to myself, if you were on the other side and somebody had that kind of information, what was the right way to play it? Ask somebody that question if they have a problem with how Don Jr. played it. What was the right way to play it? Now, if it's me and somebody says, I've got this, hot information, doesn't matter where it came from. I don't care if it came from the Russian government. First, what do you do first? Notify the FBI? Is that what you do first? Is that what you would do? Would you notify law enforcement? No, you wouldn't notify law enforcement. Only if you'd had no business experience whatsoever. But let me change the question. If you had a little bit of business experience, what would you do first? Check if it's real, right? The first thing you do is listen to it, because the last thing you'd want is to turn it over to the FBI and have them say, we're not going to tell you what we found out. That would be the worst case. Or you waste their time and, get some poor person who maybe had nothing to do with anything in trouble for something. Get them on some permanent list that the government checks all the time. No, the first thing you do, because it came through an acquaintance, somebody you had a personal connection with, and that's the key point, right? If this came from a random source, you might treat it differently. But it came from somebody he knew. And so the first thing you do is you listen to it, right? Now, if what you hear tells you there's, some national defense security problem, or that it tells you that Russia is trying to fix the election or something, well, then you've got a decision to make. What do you do with it from that point, right? But you don't make a decision before you hear it, because it's not illegal to hear it. It's useful to hear it. It might help your election to hear it. So ask those who are critical of Don Jr.'s the way he handled that. Ask them how they would have handled it, because I don't know what the alternative is. Anyway, what is hilarious about CNN is I want you to look at the pained faces of, look at the pained face of Anderson Cooper, if you could watch him talking about this. And I pick him specifically because, as opposed to Don Lemon, who is clearly just, he's just taken a side, and it doesn't really matter what the news is, he's going to be anti-Trump. But Anderson Cooper, this is just my impression of him. I've been watching him for a long time. I know people who know him. My impression of him is that he would at least like to appear like he's trying. It seems to me that Anderson would like the world to think that he's at least trying to be serious about this. And so he listens to, his panel trying to turn this clearly not a crime into something that sounds like a crime because of the words they use. Have you noticed that? So that's the hilarious part. Watch the anti-Trumpers on the little CNN panels try to talk about NothingGate, which they acknowledge is not a crime, and they try to make it a crime just with the words they're using. So, for example, they'll say, clearly this is a case of, traitorous behavior, which is, technically it's not any kind of traitorous anything. Or they'll say it's clearly intent to collude. Now, if you're not a lawyer and you hear intent to collude, wouldn't you kind of assume that was a crime? You kind of think so. Or, attempted collusion. Or they also say it tells you their mindset of the chaos that's going on and the bad judgment in the administration. Well, first of all, Don Jr., he wasn't in the administration. He's literally the guy who's not the administration. Like, he didn't take one of those jobs. So that's the first problem. But secondly, what did he do that you wouldn't have done? If it was bad judgment, CNN panel, tell me how you would have handled this. Because if the way you would have handled this is that you've heard that somebody has this terribly important information for you that may literally change the fate of the free world, because that was what was offered, information that might have changed the fate of the world. Do you not listen to it? Because you don't want to act like you had intention to collude. I can't imagine anybody who was competent who would not listen to the information, given that it came from an acquaintance. If it came from a stranger, that's a different situation. Now, it turns out it was all BS, but so the other thing that they're doing over on CNN is they'll have someone who's not a lawyer pretend that they can't tell if it's illegal or not. So the non-lawyer will say this, well, I'm not a lawyer, but I think they would certainly want to look carefully at X. Well, this thing he did was by itself certainly not illegal, but when you put it all together in a large story, I wonder if a prosecutor would have the same opinion as other people. So they found 1,000 ways to say, yeah, he's completely innocent, and any reasonable person would have at least heard what the person had to say. They've turned it into, well, I'd like to see what a prosecutor would say when they look at the totality of the evidence, and we see the intent and the willfulness to collude. I was just rolling. And what's funny about it is that you've got an entire panel of people whose reputations and their careers and stuff depend on saying something smart on television. Because if they go on television, they say something dumbass, it just follows them forever. So there's a great tension about not being a jerk on television. I no longer feel that because I don't feel any sense of shame, so it's easier for me. But you could tell, Paul Begalia, I swear to God, I've never seen a more tense-looking guy as he has to try to spin this thing so it looks like some kind of a horrible criminal conspiracy of dunces, when in fact, all Don Jr. did was, oh, you have some information? Came from somebody I know? Well, let's hear it. Now, if it had been something that was a national security problem, I'd like to think he would have told somebody. But, in the real world, most things are not the way they're presented, right? In the real world, especially in, the Trump world where hyperbole rules, if you hear that somebody has some amazing information and it will be really, really useful to you, do you know what you usually think? Well, maybe. Probably not, which is probably what he thought. Yeah, so make sure you watch CNN a little bit today and watch the panelists try to turn a nothing into a something with words.